everyone in that room was assaulted. Everyone. Hit with chairs, tables turned over, punched, kicked. People, again, mainly women, on the floor, lifted up, punched, put down again. There wasn't enough people in this meeting to satisfy the bloodlust. I looked around and thought, yeah, these people are quite willing, able, and capable of killing. And it looks like they're going to do it to these women. I was born in 1972, which means I'm pretty old. And I was born in Southeast London. And for 21 years, I lived in Lee, SE12, on a mid-sized, bright red council estate, social housing. I lived with my mother and 3 brothers. And I think it was, the more I look back and the more I think about it, it was quite a very decent childhood, actually, I had. I was problematic, but I think, we were poor but happy, like everyone was under Margaret Thatcher.
And what was London like culturally at that time? Can you paint us a picture?
Yeah, I don't really remember what it was like. I know of the period there were great things, punk in Bromley and all this stuff up Carnaby Street and punk and but it all seems to have, all the things that were particularly good about London at the time, I seem to have missed out on. I think for quite a while growing up, I felt almost as if London was spinning around and things were happening without me involved. I was for some reason shut out, or I couldn't get involved in it. I don't know. Maybe I had anxiety. I don't know. There was a lot of things I wanted to do, but never did. And my siblings and both parents later confirmed that I was, for reasons unknown, I guess probably the genteel poverty and my father running off, that I was a very, very quite angry and sour individual.
What were you angry about in particular?
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't like not having nice things. And I didn't like seeing other people have nice things. And I didn't particularly like change. When I was growing up on the council estate, it was a new build council estate. We were the first family in our house, and that council estate would have been, I think, 99% white. And I think what particularly jolted me was secondary school, when I left primary school. And I went to a really, really large, absolutely brilliant comprehensive school in Kidbrooke, Thomas Tallis in Kidbrooke, Greenwich. And it was a large, big, multiracial school. And I once more, I think, began to feel myself very, very isolated. And I've found that everybody else seemed to be far more buoyant or confident than me. And I think I carried with me into that from home and from childhood, some kind of angst, some kind of anger about poverty, about just growing up with my mum on my own, the competitiveness of life, of working class life on a council estate, about everything, particularly in that period, the Margaret Thatcher years, everything about life. When you were working class on a council estate, you genuinely felt everything in society was geared against you. And I decided that the only way my life would improve would be to sort of join up with this notorious gang of lunatics called the National Front, who obviously every kid in England who grew up in the 70s has heard of the National Front. And I just felt, you know what, the thing that would separate me or make me feel special or make me feel important would be to join up with these people and sort of, elevate me in society I don't know how that is ever supposed to actually happen. But I just felt joining the National Front would make me better, make me more important, make me more special, make me more intelligent. I desperately don't know. But the other thing I do know, of course, is I was viciously racist, horrendously racist. Such you would probably describe them as wicked and evil thoughts, and I had wicked and evil thoughts. When I did join the National Front, even the racists I knew said that was a step too far. And I realised then there is that casual, everyday South London, British, English racism, which everyone seems to be okay with, the institutional racism. And I made this conscious decision to sort of follow a racism that was almost like a religion, that almost had like a scientific basis to it. So it wasn't just hating people of a different colour. There's actually reasons to hate them, And I was given these books about race and IQ, written by morons, obviously, and read by morons, which tries to justify your racism, the reasons for your racism, and that was my childhood. It was just that, and then and that was my obsession as a teenager. Wanking and Nazism. That was basically it.
It's quite a combo.
Yeah, I've got the Nazism now.
So, for everyone who doesn't know, what is the National Front?
The National Front was formed in 1967 by three sorts of groups, sort of people that were worried about the crumbling British Empire, people who had been Mosley and fascist sympathisers before the war, and then people who were Hitler admirers. And the National Front became a proper, well, not really proper, but it became a functioning political organisation that encouraged people, in pretty much what I would still call like post-war Britain, really, to join this organisation and stop immigration. And that had a great appeal to some people. And then the National Front began to crumble when people started looking at what the National Front was. And of course, it wasn't just about stopping immigration. It was about sending black people home. Then it's about the Jews. So the National Front was really into denying the Holocaust had happened. And then by the time the National Front really imploded in 1979, 1980, people just knew it's actually a Nazi party. And it still survives today, and it's a Nazi party. And of course, they'll write to you on crayon and decry that they are Nazis, but they are.
Did you ever deem yourself a Nazi?
Yeah, I think, well, young boys in front of the mirror, what do? You just Nazi salute the mirror all day thinking you're fantastic. The organisation believed that race war was absolutely imminent, and that you could not have people of different races, cultures and beliefs living together. And so the National Front's idea was to prepare white people for this race war by giving them a political alternative, which was the National Front. So when the race war comes, an election is called, you vote for our party, and it's like one vote once because you'll be voting again. And we will be prepared to take over this country and start the mass deportations, murders, shootings, killings, whatever it is they deem necessary to save this country. And so it was antagonized and always using the opportunity to inflame tensions. I think people probably don't realize how violently dedicated they were. There were no pacifists or peace lovers in these organizations. Peace only at the cost of course, something that's incompatible with peace. These people were completely and utterly dedicated to violence. The only way you can achieve these aims is through violence. So completely unapologetic about what they do and what they think.
And were you violent?
Yes, of course I was violent, yes. There were instances where I had to defend myself. There were certainly instances when I took part in what you would call gang violence or crowd violence, one group against another. Ask anyone who's been in one of these organizations if they've been violent or if they are violent. I think the difference is I regret it, and I see there was absolutely no reason or sensible purpose for it, and I achieved nothing from it.
How high did you rise in the party?
I was elevated to chairman of London.
At what age?
About 17.
17?
I could read and write. That was the benefit. I was working as a civil servant, and the National Front offered me a full-time job to go and work in this awful little terraced house in East London, which doubled up as their head office. And I worked full-time for the National Front for a year, and partly it was working in that environment, a full-time environment. It had all the kudos that came with it. Oh, he works at the party. Oh, he's really important. But the reality of it was my ideas began to become a little bit rattled by just, partly I think because I was still quite young, and going into the job, I thought that would make me a full-time revolutionary. Instead, I was some grubby kid who sat around in a grubby room all day, shoving grubby magazines into grubby envelopes for grubby people.
And so at what point did things change?
Well, the BNP, the British National Party, in 1989 opened a shop in Welling. And one day I get a phone call from the BNP saying there's a meeting in Welling this evening at the library, and a load of Reds, which is a term for people who are anti-racist or anti-fascist or just generally haven't been banged in the head too many times. And we're going to go and protest against it. So some colleagues and I went down to the bookshop in Welling, and then from the bookshop, we went to the public library. I think there was probably as many as 40 of us. And we was outside the library, and the meeting was upstairs. So we forced our way past the caretaker, who was the caretaker of the library. Everyone, of course, stamped on his body as they went up the stairs. We got to the first floor and kicked open the doors, and we go into the room, and the guy who led this assault shouted out, "British National Party!" And it was all these horrified, stunned women. A lot of them were Asian. A lot of them were in saris, and they were just in the middle of a meeting talking about how potentially dangerous it was to have this far-right political party open a headquarter and bookshops in their community when the far-right party turned up. And they just looked like, oh my God, it's here, it's come. And everyone in that room was assaulted. Everyone. Hit with chairs, tables turned over, punched, kicked. People, again, mainly women, on the floor, lifted up, punched, put down again. There wasn't enough people in this meeting to satisfy the bloodlust of the people that were there. And it was in the middle of all this when I sort of just looked around a bit at all my glorious racial brothers and brethren, people that would, fight and die for me and with me. Looked at them, I looked around and thought, these people are quite willing, able, and capable of killing. And looks like they're going to do it to these women. And one person jumped through the window, so they landed down on the street. And there was a pregnant woman. She was an Asian woman, British Asian woman. And they kept saying, "Oh no, there's a pregnant woman, there's a pregnant woman." And so they pushed her into this laboratory and told her to lock herself in. And one of the guys pulled out a hammer and said, "Let's smash our way in and get hold of this bastard baby," or something like that. And I just remember thinking, 2 or 3 things that stick with me was the noise. People in terror, people in pain, real physical pain, that noise. The noise of grunting men assaulting women is a horrific noise. And the third was how when it was just over, it was over. That people were just sort of patting each other on the back. Like they just, I don't know, they just put the bin out, or I can't believe it. And I remember thinking in the middle of the meeting, oh, I thought I was so fucking intelligent. These are the goodies. These women are the goodies. They're the goodies, actually, because they're the ones who are talking about the things that had bothered me. These are the ones that talk about schools. These are the ones that talk about libraries. These are the ones that when the swimming pool's going to close, they get a petition up. These are the people who would eventually, of course, go on to run food banks, because we didn't have food banks back in those days. And my friends are the sort of ones who, when they go into libraries, it's to murder people. And that was, for me, because I still loved and admired and adored so many of these men. For me, it was a real playing it through in my mind, going home at night, and you could hear your heart beating in bed, just thinking, what the fuck have we just done? What have we just done? Have we killed someone? Someone died through the window? And then it sort of asked me, so what was it about? And that's what basically happened that night. And I went away. And I think a little part of me became quite anti-fascist, but not a lot of me became anti-racist, because I think the racism, you know, to me was quite cultural and quite central. The fascism, Nazism even was a political thing. So I didn't like that, because I realized, well, that's where fascism and Nazism leads. People getting their heads kicked in. The whole racism thing, I think it took a lot longer.
So what was the progress after this epiphany?
I felt that the way to stop things like this happening is to make sure that those people who are going to be the victims of this kind of stuff, and those people who had often been the victim of this kind of stuff, were better prepared and informed. And we were at times terrified of anti-fascist organizations, and we were terrified of the sort of magazines and documents that they put out. And one organization that existed at the time was the Searchlight organization, and now you'd probably call it Hope Not Hate. And we were always very, very conscious and cautious about them, about infiltrating our organizations and the work we did. So I began giving them information. I did this anonymously back in the days when people used phone boxes for making phone calls. And gradually a relationship grew to the point where they said, okay, we should meet now. So I went through, you know, a whole relationship where myself and people who worked for this anti-fascist organization would meet and do debriefings, all very, very cloak and dagger, dropping off documents, because, you know, it's all pre-internet. It was all pre the World Wide Web. And so began becoming what was a mole, carrying on my everyday life, which I had begun to really dislike. I also saw tangible results of the information that I gave, and I learned a great deal as well. It was the first time I'd had that relationship, which I have to sort of mirror now sometimes, this relationship between the handler, who is always a committed anti-fascist, and the fascist who's going through this terrible part of their life where they're completely lost and don't understand what they've done and what they're doing. And so I had this relationship where, for the first time in my life, I went out for dinner for the sole purpose of just having something to eat. Reading books that weren't about race and IQ differences and the Holocaust, or the Holocaust hoax, as they called it. I got given cinema tickets to go and see a movie I thought might be interesting, tickets to gigs. I remember they took me to see bloody Bob Dylan. Fucking hell. I'm not sure if that was punishment or not. So it was just that whole thing about, and we do it now, it's just socializing people. This is actually what the society is like that you're not part of. And I felt the whole time I was actually growing up. I was actually growing up.
You mentioned you got results by feeding information about the fascist parties. What kind of results were you getting?
There were one or two physical attacks that were carried out where I proffered an opinion on who it might have been based on the descriptions. It's really important to identify people who you see on far-right demonstrations. Why is it important? Because like with the Southport riots, you say, oh, I recognize that guy who's thrown a burning bin into a mosque. I recognize that guy setting fire to a hotel. And we go back through the files and we say, yeah, his name is so-and-so, so-and-so, because someone we had inside the far-right identified him previously. Things began, in the early 90s, things began to really come on top. The BNP's bookshop in Welling was under enormous pressure. There were riots outside the shop. There was massive marches against it. And I was sent to a meeting in Kensington Library, and it got turned over really, really badly by Red Action and others who took control of the meeting, and then when the fascists arrived, beat them all up. And after that meeting, it was decided that a new security group had to be formed. And it wasn't, of course, to provide security for the far right. It was to intimidate and attack people on the left. And that was the formation of Combat 18. So they just basically attacked anyone who wasn't them. They had this motto, you know, if you're not with us, you're against us. But they did become increasingly dangerous, and I think increasingly more chaotic. And so this a deal was done with ITV, World in Action, to do this sort of undercover expose about this new terror group that's terrorizing the nation. And it went out in April '93. And when I was 21 when it came. I just turned 21, or I was just turning 21 when it came out. And that was there was a deal, because I said, I can't do this anymore. My nerves were shot to pieces, and I want to leave. And they said, you might want to go out with a bang. You might, and I didn't want to come out on television because I was worried about my mum and my brothers, because I knew these people, the revenge would be deadly. So I had, my face was blacked out, and my words were spoken by an actor on this documentary. But everyone knew it was me. Absolutely everyone knew it was me. And I had a deal, I had an arrangement that I would go to Australia for a year. And I went to Australia for a year and stayed for 10 years.
When you got back, what level of danger were you in?
I think I'd really antagonized while I was away, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry was on. And I made a submission to that about the part that I felt the BNP had played in the murders of 4 men, not just Stephen Lawrence, four young men. And that absolutely infuriated my ex-comrades, because that was me admitting, yeah, it was me the whole time. And of course, when I came back in 2003, which seems like only yesterday really, but I came back in 2003 after 10 years. And so many of the people I knew, including the person who was hitting that toilet door in the library with a hammer to get a pregnant woman, were suddenly portraying themselves as politicians, talking about themselves being the great paragons of law and order and freedom of speech. They'd moderated their language well enough that they were starting to win council seats. Part of the problem was, I think, that large swathes of the working class had worked out that they were being abandoned by their traditional political classes. And the BNP filled this vacuum. And when I came back, you know, the idea was that I would go around and I would try and talk to communities about who these people really were. And it was very, very difficult, because the BNP were on the rise. The BNP could go to similar sort of environments that I could go to, and they could just say these monstrous and silly things. So-and-so's a communist. Muslims are raping girls everywhere. The Jews control, and they were saying these things. The Jews control the BBC, and you had a real battle on between this idea of Britain, an idea of England normally that people have that never really existed, and we found ourselves in that period of time, and it was hope not hate, arguing about our version of Britain versus their version of Britain. And their version of Britain was all white, all male, women indoors, pregnant, having white babies, no abortions. And our version was of a country that was working, was harmonious, was vibrant, was happy. And I think for a while, we were losing that. We were losing that battle. And BNP came really, really close. 2009, they got 1 million votes in the Euro elections. 1 million votes. A party that wanted to run an apartheid state, didn't believe in the Holocaust and all these kind of things, actually had in their manifestos about building work camps on the heaths in Barking and Dagenham, just absolutely bizarre. And from that moment on, I think the far right in this country has become increasingly more dangerous.
What's driving the popularity of it? Why are we seeing right-wing riots?
Well, I think, I don't want to be controversial and upset anybody. I think, yes, what drove those riots in Southport, there'd been you could feel it was going to come, that there would be. This pressure valve was going to just explode. In the lead up to the elections that just preceded the Southport riots, the Conservative Party made just everything about race and immigration. We had a Home Secretary who described our country as being invaded in small boats. And you would ask the Conservative Party, what are you going to do about this horrific waiting times in the NHS? We're going to stop the boats. What are you going to do about climate change? We're going to stop the boats. It was just ridiculous, and you could feel it. And then Stephen Lennon, Tommy Robinson, had his own little very aggro sort of demonstrations in London. You go onto social media and you would see people saying the most outrageous and awful things. That whole election was about anything other than politics. The Labour Party didn't say anything about anything. I think that's why they won. Every time the Tories opened their mouths, they just looked more and more extreme. And then what happened in Southport? It was, some people gave very little thought to the victims of that horrific assault and murder. And some people, you could see it in their social media tweets. They thought that was the moment when that race war is coming, that we can no longer live with each other anymore because they do things like that. People that talk about living in London in crime-free days, or used to be able to leave your front door open. Women used to be able to walk the streets and things like that. And all of those things would actually be nice, but none of those things have ever been true. We've always had rape and violence against women in this country. We've always had crime and burglary and violence, and people get stuck with an idea of a country that never really existed. I look at some of the far right stuff you see on social media, and AI has not been kind to them. They genuinely think that people in England rode around on horses in shining armour, wearing vests with Union flags on. I think the real problem is how little people know and understand about this country, and I was the same.
You've obviously come a long way, but if you could talk to your teenage self now before you joined the National Front, what would you say to yourself?
What would I say to a young Matthew Collins? Be nicer to your mum. Are you saying should I or do I wish I never did all this?
I don't know. Are you?
Yeah, I asked myself that. Would I still be living on the red brick in Lee? Would I still be drinking in Northbrook? Would I still be chasing the same girls who won't kiss me?
Would you have done all the good you've done now?
Probably not. It's really, really strange. I think that very lovable, roguish young teenager, would find me completely alien and wouldn't like who I am. And I think I would very much struggle to like him. Isn't that terrible? It's such narrow, no dreams, no aspirations. You know what I mean? I don't know what you do. I'd say, go on, go and do it. Yeah, just go and do it. Terrible, isn't it? But I look at the way I came out at the other end.
You're proud of yourself now?
No, not really.
Why not?
I don't think there's a lot to be proud of, is there? Come from a whole life being a fucking idiot. Really upsetting everyone. Wives, kids, girlfriends, brothers, in-laws, uncles, aunties, fathers,
Fascists.
mothers. Fascist. Upsetting fascists should actually be an award. Do you know, I've got nothing. Not even a fucking milk bottle top. But no.
Do you feel you were responsible at that age when you started with the National Front? Do you take responsibility for joining?
Yeah, technically, yeah. I've said it before. You always get these people who say they're former extremists and they just tell you so much bullshit. First of all, about the wonderful things that they never really did. And they just blame someone else. All my thoughts were original. All my thoughts were my own. All my original thoughts were obviously wrong. But they were, on the limited intelligence available to me, I draw my own conclusions that racism was better for me. The hatred of people on the basis of their color and ethnicity was better for me. I also made the rather foolish decision that I thought someday, somehow, we and people like me as I was then would be in power. It's no one else's fault but my own. Those people I joined with and got involved with, they had exactly the same daft ideas as I did. So they just wanted to be with other people with the same fears and the same thoughts and the same hatreds and the same passions. And some of them are still there, still plugging away. Nobody's fault but my own. I don't blame anyone. I don't blame my dad. I don't blame Terry Venables probably for leaving Palace for QPR, was very naughty. I don't blame anyone but myself. And people that tell it's someone else's fault need to man the fuck up. Excuse me. Because they're liars.
When you are part of the neo-Nazi movement and you stand up in the morning when you drink your first tea and you hate all day, and you listen to music and you hang around with comrades who all hate is just part of your life every second.